Students watching, boys and girls in our classroom, we're ready to begin our activity lesson. Now in this lesson, we're going to start for just a moment and we're going to look at our globe. Now, what does the globe show me, boys watching? And what does this globe show me, Emery?
The Earth.
It does. It shows the Earth. Is this the way the Earth would look if you were an astronaut in outer space, Hayden?
Yes.
It is. And I'm going to spin our globe around. And there's a lot of blue. Girls watching, what does the blue mean on our globe? And check their answer, Aria.
Water.
It does mean water. What is all of the other colors? What do they stand for, Aslan?
States.
Well, they can be states or they can be countries or even our big piece of land. Do you remember what a big piece of land is called? Students watching, what about you? Do you remember? I think Tanner's got it. Tanner, what is it?
A continent.
A continent is correct. How many continents do we have, Victoria? Think about our big pieces of land. Do you remember how many continents we have? Oh, help her out, students watching.
7.
7 is it. Good for you, Victoria. What about oceans, Titus? How many oceans?
5.
5 oceans is right. Now, I need a super map helper to come up to my globe and help me find North America. Now, students watching before they come up, you look at the globe. Is North America facing towards you? They are all shaking their heads no at me. So I need a super globe person. Benjamin, you come up here. And students watching, you help Benjamin. Tell him where he needs to spin this globe. Now they said that's not North America toward them, so you better start spinning. You see it yet, students watching? They're still saying no. They don't see it yet. Keep spinning. Ah, that looks familiar, doesn't it? Students watching, is Benjamin pointing to North America? He is, and there's a specific state he's pointing to. Benjamin, do you know what state that is? It's part of our country, but it's far away. Students watching, do you know what state this is? You have to travel to Canada to get there. Why don't we help Benjamin out? What state is he pointing to, Victoria?
America.
That's our whole country, Alaska.
Duh.
Alaska. What is it, Benjamin?
Alaska.
Alaska is it. How does it feel to live in Alaska? What is the weather like, Aria? Is it hot or is it cold?
Cold.
It is cold. It's up in the north, so that means it's cold. Now, I'm going to point to some islands. Students watching, would you tell me the island state that I'm pointing to? And Trey saw it right away. Trey, what am I pointing to?
Hawaii.
It is Hawaii. Tell me about the weather in Hawaii, Trey.
Really hot.
It is.
And it has a lot of water surrounded by it.
Yes, because what is Hawaii? What type of land?
It's
An
island.
island is it. An island means a piece of land completely surrounded by water. Now I'm going to point to a country. What is the country that I am pointing to, Hayden? I'll give you a clue. You live in it.
America.
America, or the United States of America. Now let's take a moment and let's look at our map over on the screen, and we're going to be able to see our country, the United States of America. How many states are there in our country, students watching? And how many states are in our country, Kobe?
50.
There are 50 states in our country. And remember, too, we also have something special called some American territories. Are American territory states, Emery? Do they get to vote in elections like a state does?
No.
No, it doesn't, but we still help protect them. We help take care of them. Now, as we travel across our map, in fact, what direction am I traveling if I come this way, students watching? And what direction am I traveling, Tanner? I started at California. I'm traveling to the east is correct. I'm going to come and I want you to look at this little symbol right here. We talked about it in our last activity lesson that we looked at our map. It's a circle with a star on the inside. What does that stand for, students watching? And Titus, do you remember what that stands for?
The state that the president lives in.
You know what? You just about got it right, Titus. That was a good way to think about it. He says this is where the president lives. And whenever you see a star with a circle around it, that's going to stand for the capital of the whole country. So if we look right here on our whole country, the United States of America, this is the capital of our country, which is called Washington, D.C. Can you think who Washington, D.C. was named for? Girls watching, why don't you answer that first? And I saw some fast smiles. Who was Washington, D.C. named for, Aslan? George
Washington.
George Washington. Who was our very first what, Aria? President, is it? And remember, we sometimes call him the father of our country. Well, let's take just a moment and let's look at Washington, D.C. We're going to travel to a couple of buildings and talk about why they're important. If you look carefully, you can see some different buildings on my picture. The first building I see is the Capitol building. And this Capitol building is where laws are made. We'll talk about what laws are in just a little bit. Over here is the Supreme Court building, and there are 9 justices, 9 judges who get to rule from this building, and they decide if the laws that we have are good laws. Down here, you can see just a picture of Washington, D.C. Can you see the Capitol building right there? There it is, just a little smaller because our picture shows more. Remember what this monument is called? Students watching, why don't you answer first? And what is the name of that monument? Does someone remember? Titus, you remember? I'll give you a clue. It's named after our first president.
The Washington Monument.
That's right, the Washington Monument. And remember, around that Washington Monument are those 50 flags, 1 flag for every state. Now this guy right over here, his name is Colby. And Colby is going to take us on a little trip around his city, Washington, D.C. If we look at our next pictures of Washington, D.C., right here we can see a picture of the White House. And remember, the White House is the building where the president lives. Did you know that the president hasn't always lived in the White House? We'll talk in a little bit about why they haven't always lived there. And there you can see the other side of the White House, but it's a beautiful house for our country's president to live in. Now, if we look at our picture here, one of the first things I want you to notice is that monument that Titus reminded us of. Students watching again, tell us the monument that you see on this picture. And what monument do you see, Trey? It is. It's called the Washington Monument, and it's in the shape of something called an obelisk. It was built to remember George Washington. It used to be the tallest structure or the tallest building until the Eiffel Tower was built all the way over in the country of France. Now here's another picture that we could see if we visit Colby in Washington, D.C. We kind of looked at it already. It's our Capitol building. This is where Congress meets and where laws are going to be made. Laws are really important because laws are rules. Now think for just a moment about the last time you went driving with mom and dad. They followed the law, didn't they? They didn't drive too quickly on the road. When there was a stop sign, they stopped. They obeyed the rules or the laws of the road. And laws are important to make sure that we get along with everyone and we stay safe. In our classroom, did you know that we have some rules too? One of our rules is that you sit up straight and tall when it's teaching time. That's important because that helps you learn. Another rule we have is we make sure your eyes are on the teacher. That way you can listen and learn. We make sure that our hands are kind. That's a good rule, isn't it? And all of those rules are important to help our classroom run well and for us to be able to learn together. The same is true with our laws. Our laws are important so that people stay safe on the roads. They stay safe in our communities. And many of these laws are made in this building right here called the Capitol building. Now this is something fun about the Capitol building. The Capitol building used to be used as a church on Sundays because they weren't making laws on God's day. Instead, people would meet and they would worship God there in the Capitol building. That would be fun to go to church there, wouldn't it? Here's our next picture. This shows us the Supreme Court building. And the Supreme Court building is where 9 justices or 9 judges meet together. And they help listen to the laws that were made. You see, not every law is a good law. And so they help decide, oh, did Congress do their job well? Did they have a law that's going to be good for our country? And if it's a law that doesn't follow our Constitution, those are the big laws of the land we follow, then the justices, those judges will say, no, we can't have the law like this. And they might ask Congress to have another law that maybe is a better law for our country. Now, the Supreme Court building has 5 different floors to it, But listen to the fun part. The top floor is a basketball court and a gym. The fourth floor would be my favorite floor because there's a library there. Wouldn't it be fun to go read some books from that library? But the fourth floor is the library, and the fifth floor is a basketball court and a gym that the justices get to use. Now this next building, that's familiar, isn't it? Because it's the White House. The White House is where the president lives. Now this wasn't always there, and Washington, D.C. wasn't always our country's capital. In fact, George Washington, he never got to live in the White House. It took 8 years to build the White House, and it cost over $230,000. That's a lot of money in today's money, isn't it? But when it was built, it was worth even more. It is a big, beautiful house that the president gets to live in. Every president since John Adams has lived in the White House. And in fact, this is a picture, an illustration of what John Adams looks like. John Adams, after the first time that he got to spend the night in the White House, wouldn't that have been fun to do? Well, after he got to spend the night for the first time in the White House, he wrote a letter to his wife, and it was really a prayer for the house. I want you to listen to this prayer because I think this prayer is important for even our presidents to this day. He said, I pray heaven to bestow the best of blessing on this house and all that shall hereafter inhabit or live in it. May none but honest and wise men ever rule under this roof. That's a prayer we should pray today, shouldn't we? Shouldn't we ask God to always help us to have honest, wise presidents? A wise person is someone who follows after God's laws. And we want to be wise in our classroom. And oh, it's important to have a president that's wise, that follows after the things of God. So John Adams, he wrote that prayer after he got to stay for the first time in the White House. Now, there's another picture of the White House. Beautiful porch, isn't it? Something happened. There was a war called the War of 1812. And at the War of 1812, the people who were trying to take over our country and tell us what to do, they actually set fire to the White House. But there was a very brave president's wife. She gathered up everything that was important, and even while the fire was going on, she got those things out so it stayed safe, and even to this day we can enjoy it. And after the fire was over, not the whole building was destroyed, but they rebuilt the White House, and today we still get to enjoy seeing it, and the president lives there. Something fun that they'll do at the White House is when it's Easter time, sometimes the president will invite children to come have an Easter egg hunt on those beautiful green grass that is there. Now, this is another building that you could see if you visit Washington, D.C. It's something that I would enjoy visiting. This is a special building called the Smithsonian Institution. It's a museum, and a museum is a place where you can go and you can learn about your history. We can learn about the history of our country, we can learn about the history of art, and we can learn and see many different things and just get to enrich our minds by going to a museum. Many of them are part of that Smithsonian Institution. Now, this is part of a special museum called the National Air and Space Museum. It is actually the largest collection of air and spacecraft. So if you visited Washington, D.C., you could visit this museum, and do you already see some things that you would like to see close and maybe even touch? If you go to the National Air and Space Museum, one thing that you can see are hot air balloons like this one. You can even see kites all the way from the country of China. You can even see parts of telescopes and things that they've used in outer space. So you can see that there. As well as some airplanes. One of the very first airplanes is there, and this is something that used to fly up in the sky. Now, do our airplanes look like that today, students watching? And what do you think? If you're going to take a nice plane ride, are you getting on a plane like that, Benjamin?
No.
But some of the very first people who built airplanes, it looked like this. And you can even see some helicopters, some fun things if you go and visit that National Air and Space Museum. Now, I think some of our students watching that were boys and boys in this classroom enjoyed our last pictures. But ladies, I thought you would enjoy this. This is something that you can see if you visit another museum that's a part of the Smithsonian Institution. This is called the Hope Diamond. What do you think, ladies? Do you like it? It's a gray blue diamond, and it's really big. It weighs over 45 carats. This used to be owned many, many years ago by a king of France. But this is my favorite story. Many people have owned it, but there was this one lady who owned it, and she had a dog that was a big dog called a Great Dane. And it said that she used to take the Hope Diamond and put it on the collar of her dog. And her dog would walk around her house and at parties wearing the Hope Diamond. Now, those of you with dogs, what do you think? Would your mom let you put her jewelry on your dog and walk around? I know you're saying no, I wouldn't let my dog wear my jewelry, but that was a very special dog that got to wear that beautiful Hope Diamond. Now, you can also go to some museums and see all kinds of sculpture and beautiful paintings, something you'd want to see if you visited Washington, D.C. But you can also see some old books in those museums. So lots of fun things to be able to do. This is another thing that's one of my favorite things that you could see. Maybe some of our students watching have even been to Washington, D.C. and have gone to some of these museums. There are actually dresses that presidents' wives used to wear. Now, we've been talking about the penny and we talked about Abraham Lincoln. His wife's name was Mary Todd Lincoln, and this was a dress that she actually wore many, many years ago. Now, would you see a president's wife wearing something like this today, Kobe?
No.
Not today, but when Abraham Lincoln was president, his wife would wear a dress, and I know it was very beautiful. Now, we've got just a little poem about our president and Washington, D.C. Remember, we want to pray for our president, just like John Adams wrote that prayer. We want to pray that our president is wise and honest, and that whoever the president is, that president makes good decisions. God bless the president of the USA, who lives and works in the White House each day. Our red, white, and blue flag flies so pretty in Washington, D.C., our capital city. Now let's see what we remember about Washington, D.C. Now let's look right over here and remind me about why this symbol is special. What does it stand for, students watching? And what does it stand for, Benjamin? Good, Tanner.
The capital
It is
of the state.
of the whole country, isn't it? If you see the star with a circle, that's a capital of a country. What is the name of our country's capital? Emery?
Washington.
Washington, D.C. is, and it's named after George Washington. Now, remind me how Washington, D.C. is shown on a map. I'm not going to let you look at that map. So you think in your head, how do we say there is a country's capital? Titus, what's that symbol?
A star with a circle.
That's right. A star with a circle means that it is going to be a country's capital. Now, what important person lives in Washington, D.C.? Don't give a specific name. Think of the job that this person has. Students watching, you answer first. And what important person lives in Washington, D.C., Victoria? The president. Where does the president live? In what house? Aslan?
The White House.
Excellent job. And is it important to pray for our president, Hayden?
Yes.
Absolutely. What's something we should pray for, students watching? And what's something that we should pray for, Aria, for our president? Who should they follow after?
The president.
Well, the president does follow after. He helps us make those good decisions. He's a leader, that person, that president. But what should we want our president? Who should we want our president to follow?
God.
We should pray that they are wise and that they are honest. Now, what is another name for Allah? Can you think about that, students watching? Kind of have them in the classroom. I know you have them in your home. What is another name for Allah, Tanner?
Rule.
That's it. And why don't we think of some rules that would be important in a classroom? Students watching, you think of one first. Good, I think that's a good one. What's a rule that's important for the classroom, Trey?
To put your hands in your lap.
Sure, because we want our hands ready to do our job when it's time. That's a great rule. What's another good rule for a classroom, Emery?
Don't get out of your seat.
Absolutely. We need to stay in our seats unless we have permission. That way we're able to do our jobs. Kobe, what would another good rule for a classroom be?
To obey your teacher.
Oh, that's a great rule, isn't it? You want to obey those who are over you. But let's think for a moment. What would happen if our classroom didn't have any rules? What do you think might happen, students watching? And what's something that could happen if our classroom didn't have rules, Tanner? Do you think we would get jobs done? Would we get learning done? No, so are rules important, Benjamin?
Yes.
They are. They're very important to have and also to follow. Students watching, we enjoyed going to Washington, D.C. with you.